Just don't let me do whatever the fuck I did again. I don't know what the hell I did that.
You just
that
fucking, you tripped over it. What do you mean?
God fucking damn it, man.
Hey.
Audio issues.
Flip in.
We're in. Yeah. Boom. Fuck it in. I don't know what the hell did I even do. I like.
You tripped over it. You were stepping over because you were gonna start recording.
Oh my god. I felt like shit.
What do you mean?
Something about that. Something about just kicking out a fucking wire like that, bro. Just
for
like
us,
it's just
a little piece of you died.
A little piece of me. It felt like it died. Yeah, because it's like fuck. Now I have to buy a new mic. I just got this thing like what 3 months ago? Not even actually. It's been a few months. But anyway,
it's been a minute.
It's been a minute.
Yeah. So how was training this week?
Training this week's good. I found a good cadence feel.
Every other day, right?
Every other day. On the days that I don't go.
That's dedication, folks. All right, that's dedication right there. Because most people would use that as an excuse, like, "Yo, this isn't for me." You know what I mean? But nah, this guy.
Well, I fucking definitely have thought of that.
I know you have,
because of my fucking condition. Because I have really sensitive and fucked up skin ever since I was a kid. Eczema, baby. So, and everyone's is different, but mine is. Over the years, I've come to learn that big triggers for it are stress and sweat are like the top two.
Yeah.
So jiu-jitsu actually really helps with the stress part, which is why it's kind of like
it's a give and take.
It's a give and take. Yeah. Especially with like my hand, so it's like different types. Like my hand will have really bad eczema, and that's really good with when I alleviate stress. My hands turn out really good. But then the
sweat
part contributes to everything else.
Like your neck, your elbows.
Yeah.
You don't get it too much on your legs, huh?
Not too much anymore. I used to a lot, but not as much. It's not as bad anymore.
Yeah. Allegedly, this is my fault. Because when I first came to Canada, my mom was pregnant with my brother. I got chicken pox, and then I gave it to my parents.
Fucking classic.
Yeah, I remember you being being a baby. You had some fucking crazy rashes,
dude. It's crazy. Like I feel like it's every other Asian baby.
You think so?
My coworker just had a kid recently, and they're going through
like eczema and shit
with his fucking face.
Oh shit! Like the same shit that you had, like where you were all like pretty much.
I had like my cheeks and everything.
Yeah, you had on your cheeks,
and my fucking ass and. All different kinds of places.
Yeah, that's dope. Yeah. So what's the cadence then? Like,
so yeah, I basically only go, like I only went to gi once this week. No gi for the rest. So that's what I went to, like 3 no gi classes this week. And then the off day I would go to the gym, get a lift in. But I did go one day to a gi class, like I said. No, that one was like really bad. Because just the fucking fabric, bro.
Yeah,
the fabric is so brutal.
Yeah,
even for people that don't have like sensitive skin and shit.
Yeah,
like,
it's a real thing, man. Like you have that. It's a heavy fabric too. That's like textured.
Fabric.
You know
it has to be, otherwise
it has to be, because otherwise you get it rips.
Yep. But I mean, yeah, I've been working. Fuck, bro. I've been playing around with some shit, playing around with a lot of half guard. I think that's probably like the direction I want to go, just because I'm in that position so much. And when I'm passing, half guard top, I'm in there a lot.
Yeah, so work from that, right?
Yeah. But I find that like just logically and I guess rationally, if I'm in that position a lot, probably makes sense to like also be on the opposite end or the receiving end of that position, so I can really understand the nuance.
Yes, and perhaps something to focus on would be to just stay on top. I mean, I'm projecting here at this point because I spent like the better part of 2-3 years on bottom half, which that's where I really like did a deep dive on like just half guard in general, but like Kimura trap, like guillotines, front headlocks, stuff like that. But that was, I think that was more out of necessity, because just the pain from my back was just so unbearable that I couldn't do anything from top anyway, like passing and whatnot. So I kind of neglected the top. But I think just like from a self-defense aspect in general, like I think what a lot of jiu-jitsu guys kind of get in the habit of is just falling to their backs and pulling guard. those guys are not going to get into Valhalla anytime soon.
You're
But
not.
I mean, from just a self-defense aspect and just from a fighting aspect, like you want to be the guy that's on top. It's like what Khabib says. It's like, no, like if you're on bottom, you're losing, brother. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's sick to hear that you're looking at it from like more of a passing thing, because definitely, just stay on top. I mean, don't get me wrong. Obviously, there's still there's obviously 100% like value in working from half guard bottom. I don't want to make it seem like I'm hating on half guard bottom, because it's one of my favorite positions, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It just makes so much sense to me, because like I compared to other guards, right? And there actually was a video that I saw in it too. I never really took it in, but in MMA even, like half guard is one of the most common positions grappling wise, and a lot of submissions and just finishes start from half guard.
Start from half or an open guard.
But
yeah, I mean, I would say that the majority,
I mean, that was Damian Maia's entire game.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Well,
even full guard. Damian had a deadly full guard, too,
right?
Like full guard as well, right?
Well, a lot of his matches, more often than not, were in started with him either passing half guard, or if he was on bottom half guard, he would wrestle up.
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing too. Is like
press against the cage.
Musa's been doing a lot of wrestle ups lately, and it's magnificent, man.
Apparently, it's like the meta right now.
Like wrestle ups, yeah, 100%. Well, yes, it's definitely gotten like a big spotlight over the past few years for sure. I would say, and I don't know, maybe I'm just kind of speaking from my own experience, but I know it's been a big focus of ours. Just like at Current, for example, that's what Musa has been teaching. Even prior to Current, like a lot of Musa's, so Musa, shout out my guy, is basically the wrestling coach over at Current and Armin U in general. But yeah, this guy's just obsessed with grappling. This guy just has a passion for grappling in general. Like he's been a brown belt in judo for as long as I've been training jiu-jitsu. And now he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and he's wrestled in the past as well. And he's just an overall beast, but he's definitely spent a lot of time developing a curriculum around just wrestle ups in general. And it's like my wrestle up game is still trash, but it's night and day from what it was. And especially from half guard, there's a bunch of options from there as well.
Yep. The single leg, even just fucking wrestling up from
dog fights.
The dog fight as well. But, yeah, even just like deep half. I suck at deep half right now. I'm like between the two, because I feel like there's only really two routes you can go from half guard. Two like main routes. Either, those single leg wrestle up, or you reverse into or not reverse, but you go into the deep half. You can probably
you have butterfly half as well.
Butterfly too, if you want to reverse, right?
There's a whole bunch of and then you get into double butterfly from there. Like that's what a lot of Ryan has been teaching as well lately. But yeah, no, definitely half guard. Spending a lot of time on half guard, and I think this speaks to like a really important thing in any kind of skill development is isolating a particular thing of that skill, and just focusing on that particular facet of that skill, and just honing your skills on that aspect, right? So this is something that I know really helped me, and I kind of just accidentally got into it because, again, of my injury or whatever. But just focusing on half guard bottom, Kimura trap for like a good year, 2 years, and then literally having themes of like the quarter, right? So you can just, okay, for this quarter, I'm just going to focus on leg locks. For this quarter, I'm just going to focus on half guard bottom. This quarter, I'm going to focus on front headlocks. So every class, you're kind of like, you're still going to be working on whatever the instructor is teaching you. But I think at some point you do have to take a little bit more accountability and ownership of your own development as well. Like what you're learning in class is just one facet. At least this is if you want to like min-max your development, right? Like obviously, like you'll still get value in just going to class and then like definitely just working on what the instructor is teaching you, and then drilling that, especially when you're like rolling or whatever. But at a certain point, it usually happens around like blue or even purple. Like you have to kind of take a little bit more ownership and accountability of your own development.
Take that ownership, folks. And perhaps for the folks tuning in on this glorious Sunday, January the 21st, we didn't even check in with you guys, but appreciate you checking in with us.
Oh yeah, brother.
As you can tell, we're trying to get a little bit more informed, a little bit more educated on the world. Today we are clearly talking about jiu-jitsu. We got a long one ahead of us, a long but good one.
No way. Yo, this is the beauty of working with technology. Sometimes, most of the times it works.
Yeah.
Some of the times it doesn't, and when it doesn't, it's painful.
It is a pain in the ass. I feel like I can't move this thing. But just to finish what I was saying before, we got a long one ahead. Oh, not a long one, but like we got a good one ahead. Mm-hmm. We got we're. What are we talking about today? What the hell's on the docket? It's jiu-jitsu. That's the topic for today, folks. It's a jiu-jitsu episode.
I mean, you know what? This is just maybe today is just a focus on jiu-jitsu, but this is not gonna be the last time.
It's not gonna be the last time. I think we've talked about it consistently for the past 5 episodes.
You know, this is the kind of the inside joke in jits and just training is like don't let a jiu-jitsu guy start talking about jiu-jitsu.
Yeah,
you're gonna spend a bit of time there.
So this is us trying to just get it all out of the fucking way.
Out of our system, you know,
just get it out of our system, right? Just fucking yak it out.
You know, you gotta eliminate
it. Exactly. We got some demon souls in our fucking body right now. We gotta expunge it out of our system so that we
gotta exercise it, bro.
Yeah,
we never used that back in the day. It was always eliminate, eradicate, and expunge, but we never thought about exercise it.
We didn't think about adding a fourth E in there. There's a lot of words that start with E. And exercise is a good one. But
yeah, speaking of jits, man, I really I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like jits is kind of making a comeback in MMA. Because there was a point in time there where it's just like in the UFC, I felt like I wasn't seeing like a lot of submissions. I wasn't seeing a lot of like really good grappling exchanges. But and again, maybe this is just me, but I think the past few cards, you're really starting to see like people that are really good at jiu-jitsu start to like really use those skills against their opponents, which is fucking dope to see. I mean, like, you know, I feel like it comes in waves. You know what I mean? You have like in the beginning of UFC's history, obviously you had the Gracie family, you had Hoist just go in there and just like manhandle these guys because they didn't know any jits, and then eventually everybody started learning jits, and then it kind of like now like that then became more of a strikers game where everybody came to the table with some level of grappling. But generally, like wrestlers have always obviously been strong, and then like there was a little bit of a lull, and then you have some other guys that are really good grapplers, but maybe not so much submissions. But then you have guys that are like Charles Oliveira, for example, just submitting everybody for a time. And again, another lull, another valley, I feel like, and then now it's kind of making a comeback. But I don't know, maybe that's just my kind of perspective on it.
There was UFC 298 last night.
I think it was 297, wasn't
297?
it? 298. I don't know.
That fight with Pennington and Bueno Silva kind of, for me, was like eye-opening in the sense that, man, just trying. I feel like, yeah, you're right. That it's kind of having a bit of a resurgence right now.
Right? Yeah.
But it's just, I feel like it's just so hard to execute on now because people are so
because everybody's
good
coming to the table with those baseline skills. Like if you're not training jits in your training camp, you're doing it wrong. You're probably, honestly, if you're not not going to make it in the UFC. Like there's exceptions. Like you have like Poatan, for example. You have Alex Pereira, right? I don't think he like you really see him use too much of his grappling because he's such a just phenomenal striker. So you still see some guy, and look at Adesanya as another great example where he's not known for his grappling or anything like that, but I think they focus more on like anti-wrestling and anti-jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
But I think because everybody's already coming to the table with, so like the breed, okay, before, this is how I see like the evolution of UFC and MMA.
Yeah. Why don't you start from the beginning to how BJJ even like entered the scene?
So BJJ, and I might butcher this, I probably will, but this is just my understanding of it. Okay, so we got to go back to judo. We got to go back to Japan where it all started. You know what I mean?
He's getting Japanese with it.
You know what I mean? So jiu-jitsu is actually just the ground fighting of judo. And, you know, I forget, I think it was Jigoro Kano. He was like a professor that in like the mid 1800s or whatever, that kind of formalized and created all of the techniques that you know of jiu-jitsu today. I think he based a lot of his work on like ancient teachings from like the samurai days, where literally after, like, if they got in close combat or whatever, and they both didn't have swords, they had to like grapple with their armor and shit, and like try to get take the person down, and then use their other blades to like kill them, right, or whatever, right? So I think he used a lot of, like, he borrowed from a lot of those techniques and then formalized it with the gi, and then that became judo. And then that, like, part of judo is like what people know today is people like throwing and getting ippons, right? But
What's an ippon?
Ippon is basically just like it ends the match. It's like, if I can get my opponent's back square on the mats with a throw, that's an ippon. That means like,
oh, it's like a throw so good.
It's game over at that point. There's you could score points in judo, right? Where like it's like maybe they just landed half on their back, but not fully. Like it wasn't a full ippon. Anyway, so judo became a thing. Kano had a bunch of disciples or whatever. And one of them, Mitsuyo Maeda, I don't know if Mitsuyo Maeda was a student under Jiro Kano or if he was a second generation, but he, in the early 1900s or late 1800s, he so a lot of disciples of judo. And again, judo doesn't, what I was getting about like the ippon is like, judo doesn't just include throws. It includes ground fighting as well. So if you look at old black and white tapes of judo demonstrations, they're doing jiu-jitsu too. They're going to the ground. They're doing submissions. Now it's obviously like not as refined as it is today, so it's a little bit silly at some points. But point being is that they, the judo kind of crew in Japan, they sent out a lot of like high level instructors and disciples of judo around the world. So that's where you had like a huge emergence of judo in Europe, for example. Like France has a rich culture in judo.
So it was just like a kind of religion to them. They were just trying to like spread the good.
It's like they were kind of like, it was like some evangelistic like judo, like let's spread the good word of judo
Jehovah's
type of shit. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it's also immigration, right? Like,
I wonder how that looked like. Just on the ground level, like you show up to these dojos like, yo, you guys ever heard of this thing called Jiu-Jitsu?
Well, actually, so I don't know, but I'm sure it worked out this way in other countries, but the way that it actually kind of panned out in Brazil. So now fast forward a little bit, Mitsuyo Maeda. So Maeda emigrated from Japan to Brazil. And
what the fuck were Japanese dudes going to Brazil for?
Trade, like that's what, like around the same time you had a bunch of Japan opened its borders, right? Because prior to that, it's kind of like Wano, right? Like nobody's allowed to enter, nobody's allowed to leave. That's One Piece. Shout out One Piece episode, almost on episode 800. We should do an ep on that one day. You're just about like
100%,
like One Piece in general. Anyway, so Maeda went from Japan to Brazil, and I think the way that at the ground level, like what you were asking about, was they would have like these exhibition matches where it's kind of like how it's really cool because history is like poetry, right? Things repeat, things echo, right? And so a big reason why UFC came about was because the Gracie family wanted to spread the good word of jiu-jitsu, and they figured that UFC would be a great way to do that because it's just like exhibiting like how jiu-jitsu is just that much more superior than a lot of martial arts at the time, right? So I think what happened with Maeda's case was that he would have a lot of like exhibition matches just going around and like having these fights, basically just showing the effectiveness of judo or whatever, right? Again, I could be wrong on that. This is just going off of memory. I forget.
Dude, he must have been seen as like a crazy dude.
Oh, beast. He was a beast. So
imagine some fucking Japanese dude in the favelas of Brazil.
Probably doesn't speak the language.
Just
like, going around like, yo, who wants to fight?
Who wants to fucking scrap? You know, like, I'm gonna fuck you up. You know what I mean? He's probably doing that for money.
Shit. Well, I think probably a little bit for money, but I think you know what, this is a good thing for me to do a little bit more digging on, but maybe we could do a deeper dive on that stuff at a later point. But basically, as far as Maeda is concerned, one way or another, he met the Gracie family, and it was from Carlson Gracie. So Carlson Gracie and his brothers, they started training under Maeda, started learning judo and like newaza, which is newaza is just the word in in Japanese for ground fighting, like the ground fighting aspect of judo.
And were the
So it's like a
Gracies,
sub of judo.
were the Gracies even doing any? Were they even a martial arts family
so the
before?
Gracies
or-
were, from my understanding, they were Welsh immigrants that migrated to Brazil. So Gracie's not like a Portuguese last name. That's a Welsh last name. And Carlson, which I believe is the older brother of Helio, he started training under Maeda. And then Helio was always like, he was like a sickly child. Like he wasn't very physically strong or anything like that, but he would always watch his brothers train.
Now, did they have martial arts background before that?
No, not as far as I know. Not
They were just a family that is like, yo, they probably like saw those fights in the streets and were like, this is it.
I think that's, well, not necessarily. Yeah, I think that's probably what ended up happening, because I think Maeda ended up like opening up an academy or
Dude,
whatever.
That's some anime shit right
Right,
there,
exactly.
Bro. It's like,
yeah, because you imagine like what the days were like back then, right? Like late 1800s, early
No
1900s,
technology,
no
nothing.
technology.
Yeah.
You just, like that. Like you just walk into a dojo, like no modern mats, it's just tatami. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty cool, right?
Jiu-Jitsu in the tatami, bro.
Yeah.
Oh,
Fuck. Anyway, so Helio would always be around the academy, would always be like watching his brothers like learning judo and like just newaza or whatever. And then I think the story goes that this is kind of like jiu-jitsu mythology, like legend type shit, where whenever somebody would come and like look for training, whatever, and like if his brother wasn't there or if like Maeda wasn't there, Helio would be the one that shows them. But eventually Helio started training, and it turns out like through Helio and Carlson and his brothers, like they kind of refined a few aspects. Like they really just did a deep dive on the ground fighting aspect of newaza, of judo. So they would still do the stand up and whatever. They would still train with strikes, but they really started refining certain, like, just cleaning up the techniques that already existed, right? And so Helio and Carlson and I don't know if there was another brother or whatever, but it's really those two that are in history that are kind of like, once they started really training, whatever, they started having these exhibition fights, right? So they would go around and like challenge, like, basically do Gracie challenges, right? And actually that's where Kimura, one of the big iconic fights of the time, I think it was like maybe the 30s or 40s, but Kimura, this beast, I think he was a student under Jigoro Kano, or at least a second generation or something like that. He ended up having a super fight with Helio Gracie, and he broke his arm. So that's why with a Kimura. That's why it's called the Kimura today.
Yeah. Sometimes I forget that these names, these moves like Kimura, Dars or De La Hiva are named.
Yeah,
I mean, they sound fucking people. Sick. It's like you just never really think about it at the time, but like, you don't take it in.
Yeah. Somebody made it popular.
It was, it's pretty fucking dope.
It's dope. Yeah, but I mean, like the thing is, it's in the jiu-jitsu world. Like in other what do you call it? In other languages, in other disciplines, it already had a name prior to that. It's just because jiu-jitsu is like relatively new compared to like wrestling, compared to judo, for example. Like most common jiu-jitsu techniques have a Japanese name because that's when it came from when it was from the because it was already newaza. It was already like a sub form of judo, right? So anyway, Helio made jiu-jitsu and Carlson made jiu-jitsu massive. You had a big wave of people that started training under them.
We're still in Brazil at this point.
We're still in Brazil at this point, and Helio had a bunch of sons. A couple of them are three of them. There are three of them that are notable from Helio, which are Hickson, Hoyce, and Hoyler. So let's go down the three. So Hickson was like the champion of the family. This guy was just an absolute tank of a man, just a unit. Stud. And he did a lot of MMA fights and was always like the champion of the family. And like unanimously from that generation of jiu-jitsu like players, like they all see him as just the absolute beast. Like there's no, like he's kind of like the Gordon Ryan of that generation. You know what I mean? And up until Gordon Ryan's emergence in the no-gi world, like Hickson was seen as the GOAT of jiu-jitsu, even though he didn't really have the credentials to kind of like, you know, back it. But I think the people that did have the credentials, the guys that were world champions from that generation, they all trained with Hickson, and they would all say unanimously, no, Hickson's that guy. Yeah. He's him. He's him. You know what I mean? So that's Hickson, right? Beast of a guy. Then you have Hoyce, who he's the one that actually, you know what, let's cover Hoyler first. Hoyler is the one that was actually responsible for the UFC. So this is actually now where those three sons, they started bringing it to America, right? Mostly it had to do with Hoyler, I would say, because Hoyler was the one, like, he was kind of like the business guy, the marketer or whatever, right? So he was trying to think of ways like, oh, how do I spread the good word of jiu-jitsu so that we have more people at our school, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he thought of an idea, and like back then, prior to the UFC, a common thing that was happening was dojo, like the practice of dojo storming. And for those that don't know what dojo storming is basically like, I'm gonna go and go to another like gym, whether it be a kung fu gym, a karate gym, or whatever, and like challenge their champion, challenge like the guy on their mats. And basically my plan is, I'm gonna fuck you up so bad that your students now be like, oh fuck, I'm spending the wrong, and I'm gonna go start training in jiu-jitsu, you know what I mean? So that's what it was like back in the day.
Straight anime shit.
It's dope. Well, it's kind of fucked up, but it's also like dope. For the story, it's dope, right? It's cool.
Because bro, these Gracie folks who are probably spending all their time at the fucking dojo,
just refining their technique.
Fuck, do we monetize this?
Well, yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? That too.
Like, we gotta put some food in the fucking table. Yeah. These Atami mats ain't cheap.
And this is not an uncommon practice, honestly, because if you look at like any old school like kung fu movie, that's literally what they did too. You know what I mean? They would just go in and like try to take each other's students basically by showing that their form, their art is more superior, their version of kung fu, their interpretation of kung fu, right? So basically Hoyler had the idea of like, oh, okay, how am I gonna like spread the word, right? So he thought of the UFC. And the first few events, you could see that this is now enter Hoyce. Hoyce was the one that was like the smallest. I would say he was probably the smallest brother out of all the family. And by the way, Henzo's another brother. So it's Henzo. I forgot to mention Henzo, but in the bigger scheme of things, like in this topic, actually, he's not good. But shout out Henzo. Henzo's the black belt that trained John Danaher, who then trained Gordon Ryan, who is basically the best grappler in the fucking world, right? Which is pretty cool when you think about it, because we're really only 3-4 generations off from the source when you actually break it down. You know what I mean? It's pretty cool when you think about it that way. But so Hoyler created the UFC, and then he brought his brother Hoyce to basically go in there against other guys that were masters of their discipline, whether it be judo or boxing or street fighting. Bro, the wild days of UFC, like the early UFC, was nuts. Like no holds barred. People were like fucking punching each other in the nuts.
They're wearing shoes and shit.
There's this one classic clip. I forget the guy's name, but he basically had him in a crucifix position, and he just takes the guy's head, just fucking boom, boom, boom.
Yeah,
man. So it was crazy. So, but the thing is, back then, so circling this back around to what we were talking about initially, is that back then, because there wasn't really MMA, like everybody was kind of specializing in one aspect of combat. So you had a boxer, and that's all you did. You had a kickboxer, that's all you did. Muay Thai, that's all you did. Judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, right? So it was really cool to really see like, okay, which martial art is most effective, right? When you clash those two styles together. So you would have a boxer face a kickboxer. You would have a kung fu guy facing a sumo wrestler. Like it was wild back in the day.
And that's why the UFC was even made in the first place.
That was literally
to answer
why
that question.
Exactly.
Which is so fucking
But
dope.
also because the thing is, because of the fact that they've the Gracies were already doing a bunch of these like dojo storms or whatever, they knew damn well that their shit was the shit.
So Hoyler was really like, how involved was he? Do you know?
He created it.
He created
it from the ground up.
Was Dana in the picture?
No. So Dana and the Fertitta brothers came at a later point.
They came later.
They came later.
I didn't know that
they
Hoyler
bought it
made
from Hoyler. Yeah, for like peanuts compared to what it's worth now. So
Yeah.
we can get there if you want. But Hoist was selected to go in there as the initial guy, and Hickson was gonna sit in the sidelines just like as just in case, like, you know what I mean, like, because I think from a marketing standpoint, if you look at the two like side by side, you have one guy who's just a stud, like Hickson was like that guy, you know what I mean? He looked like he looked the part, you know what I mean? Yeah. Whereas Hoist was this scrawny dude, like, you know, not jacked at all or whatever. Dude. So if you were to ask me, like, okay, as Hoyler, what would it be? What would look more dramatic? What would be more provocative? If I had the guy that looked the part that's beating people up, or a guy that doesn't look the part but still fucking man's up? From a marketing standpoint, I would choose that guy. You know what I mean? So that's, I think, the reason why he was selected to fight instead of Hickson. And Hoist back then, and like, you know, everybody's used to watching UFC now. There is just a couple of guys in shorts, nothing else, right? But Hoist would wear the full gi to his fights, and he was just tapping everybody, fucking everybody up, because nobody knew. Nobody had no idea, like most of these guys had no idea what these submissions were. You know what I mean? So, and the thing is, Hoist would be going into these fights, and back then there were no weight classes. Right? Yeah. And there were no rules around like what you had to wear in the ring. Bro, you had guys that were really literally wearing one boxing glove and a bare, like, no glove on the other hand. Like, it was wild right?
shit.
So
some wild
west shit. Yeah, 100%.
Motherfuckers were wearing shoes.
I don't even know. Like, the only reason why they got sanctioned, I think, a lot of the time was because they were doing these on like Indian reserves, where there were no rules around that shit. Yeah. And it was literally like, it was kind of human cockfighting back then.
It was.
You know what I mean?
That's what it sounds like.
I remember watching UFC back in the early days at this like one family party in like this. I forget which family it was, but anyway. So I remember like, there was a UFC on. I just remember watching, like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
If only I got into fucking training back then, man. Oh my God. But anyway, so Hoist was just fucking everybody up, and like guys that were way bigger than him. And that's where you started seeing the first huge wave of jiu-jitsu spread across North America once that happened.
This shit's fucking amazing.
Yeah,
so small dude can beat up some Goliath.
This was like the mid-90s.
What were some notable fights?
Notable fights back then, like from that generation.
Like who do Hoist
like
fuck
Hoist
up?
And like Frank Shamrock.
Hoist and Frank Shamrock.
I think that was a big one, because Frank Shamrock definitely looked the part. He was fucking jacked, and he also knew how to grapple too. That's the crazy part.
Juice to the gills.
Yeah, well,
there was no rules around that.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, back. I should mention too is like MMA already existed for a long time. Like, this is what I'm saying, like that, like Hoyler and the Gracies, like they already knew that their shit worked, just because like back then they were having like one of the legendary fights from back in the day pre-UFC was when Hickson was like 19 or 20, a very young dude facing this guy that was just like this mandingo of a man. Is that even is mandingo is that a bad word? I don't even know. Yes, this big black dude, like just fucking
you,
like just I don't even know if he was juiced, but he was just a superhuman of a man. Like Hickson like beat him in a it was like an MMA match, but it wasn't an MMA match. Like they weren't wearing gloves. Like this was like a common thing back in Brazil. And anyway, so where was I? So now, like, that's the first wave, and that's when people that were really getting into it, that's where they knew, okay, fuck, we have to start training some of this jiu-jitsu shit, because at the very least start defending it. But I think that's when you started seeing, okay, now that was the first wave of MMA and jiu-jitsu. Then it became a little bit more organized and formalized, where you had people kind of cross training from different things. You had wrestlers that usually it was like, if you had good wrestling and good boxing, you would make some waves in UFC, right? And then you still had your grapplers or whatever, but you still had your submissions or whatever. But I felt like it still happened a lot. I feel like you still. I wonder what the numbers would look like. But this is what I was talking about earlier, where in the beginning it was like you had a lot more specialization in specific arts. Then it kind of leveled out because everybody started coming to the table with like at least an average of everything and then specialization of something.
And do you think the UFC was a big part of that?
100,000. Yeah. It basically like it opened up the door for a whole new martial art to take over, really. Because up until this point, it was really just boxing that was making any kind of waves from a combat sports standpoint, which is wild to me because Muay Thai is way funner to fucking watch. But Muay Thai, for whatever reason, like the North American market is the most important market, right? In terms of like just like viewership and entertainment and how much money people spend.
So do you think the UFC right now, do you think a lot of people are interested or being drawn to jiu-jitsu because of the fact that it's one of the most effective martial arts, or is it because is it like a superiority thing, or is it more just because it's fun? Like, what do you think?
I think the UFC definitely has a big part of it, 100%. Because usually, like, if you stay in the game long enough, you find like it comes in waves. It's interesting to see when you do see an event, a UFC event, where there's a grappler that really shines, or not even just one UFC event. If there's a UFC fighter that's just known for grappling and like submissions or whatever, then I usually find like there's a big wave of people that end up getting interested in it. It was like, oh, like I want to be able to do that. It's kind of just like how like the first wave of just like you watch a UFC event, you're like, holy crap, like I need to learn the submission stuff, right? But I think right now, I think the jiu-jitsu community owes a big debt to Joe Rogan, honestly, because Joe Rogan, I mean, I know for me that was like, this was back in 2015 when Rogan's podcast was not what it is today. You know what I mean? And I was listening to it back then, like 2014, I think is when I started listening. And I remember thinking like, fuck, like because I first started training boxing or whatever. And then I always, because of Joe Rogan talking about jiu-jitsu, I'm like, I got to try that shit too. Like I always was interested in it, but I think it was Rogan that was really
he
just
was
like,
selling the fuck out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
What was he say? What would he used to say? Like, well, how would he, do you remember? Like,
I think I don't remember anything specific really, but I knew that he trained as well. And
did he talk about it a lot?
He talked about it he would talk about it often enough.
Who would he talk to
well, like, because he would be with Eddie Bravo a lot.
Eddie Bravo.
Back in those early days of that pod, Eddie was like a mainstay in that pod.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So
Eddie Redben,
Joey Diaz. He was just on last night. Did you see that?
He was on.
He was on, bro.
No
and they
way.
had a fight companion too. I gotta watch that fight companion, man. I'm cheesed that I didn't realize that there was a fucking fight companion. Shout out Joe, man. So I think a lot of people, and because of Joe Rogan's influence and impact over the past few years, I think a bunch of people are starting like that should be interesting actually, like, but like it should be interesting to see if people actually, like, if you were to do a survey, how many people like actually like why they started training. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's something that I've been curious about. But yeah, it's funny how you bring up Rogan and his influence, because at work, it's true. It's fucking crazy the amount of influence he has. It's even touching me at I say touching me, but it's far extending to me. That's a terrible way to frame it too.
Yeah, just talk natural.
It's influenced
one of indubitably, perhaps, and existentially, and
one of my work clients is a company that saw a huge boost in sales and just overall influence because of being shouted out on Rogan. So
really, what company?
It's called Kettle and Fire. They do soups.
What is that? Soups.
They do packaged like prepackaged soups. Yeah. And I guess like I never really confirmed this, but my coworker was telling me like, yeah, like these guys really like they need a lot of help because like the amount of demand that has come because of Rogan. Because of Rogan is just really wild, fucking, bro. Yeah, got their cogs turning for sure, but it's wild.
It's crazy the reach that because remember, like I started watching Rogan's pod during the days that he was like his primary sponsor was Fleshlight, bro.
That's so fucking good, man.
Like the amount of, and I think this is, I think it speaks to the fact that when you're just as authentic and as genuine, like for better or worse, because I think that's something that Rogan's always like, he's always stood on business. He always stood his ground on anything that he actually believes in. You know what I mean?
That's the beauty of the podcast.
That's the beauty of the
too.
podcast format, is because he never had anybody to answer to.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
never.
Like it was always, and shout out like who's the oh my gosh, now the name's escaping me now, but the guys that really started podcasting.
Oh, like
it was a radio show.
Yeah.
It was really there were a couple key a few key individuals that really, it actually, like, podcasting really started in radio, right? And it was basically a hang. It was one of the biggest shows on satellite radio. I forget what the fucking name is now.
I'm getting it right now, but
it's where like bro, you would have the best comedians in New York or anywhere really that would just go in there and hang. It was like the early
Howard Stern.
No, well, Howard Stern was the first one, and actually there was another guy before Howard Stern that was saying some wild shit even before that.
Ryan Seacrest?
No. I think he got canceled actually eventually because he was saying some wild shit. It was some racist shit. But anyway, so it was Howard Stern, and then it was two guys. It was in New York. Fuck, man.
Or are these the guy that group that Rogan got
Look up
with?
dirt. YouTube. Eggnog Bird Rogan Burr.
Yeah.
There was this, I think they called it the Dirty Bird Challenge, where they had this guy fucking drink gallons of eggnog, and then he just started yakking all over the place, bro. And then you just hear all these comedians just like going, like they were all in the room. And not only was he yakking, but he was yakking to another guy's mouth, bro.
Oh my god, I do. Yeah, you showed me this.
Legendary,
the other
bro.
month.
It's so much fun.
Eggnog Challenge with Pat from. So this was, who is this? Who is it? This was
Eggnog. Just do like eggnog.
Opie and Anthony.
Opie and Anthony. Yeah. Yes.
2006. The Eggnog Challenge.
Opie and Anthony basically were these two radio jockeys that were really big in the satellite radio days, like pre, like, you know, podcast, internet or whatever. And the crazy thing about, like, okay, so you have to remember, like, radio back in the, like, radio now, actually, like your 98.7s, KISS 92.5 or whatever. I'm dating myself now, but there were very strict regulations around what you can do on public radio, like no swearing, nothing like nothing too crazy.
Nothing
you know
political.
what I mean? But then because of satellite radio, now guys were able to go on satellite radio, and it's kind of like, it's like the Patreon of YouTube, in a sense that you could just go in there and say some wild, outlandish shit, and nobody, like, because you're on satellite radio, there's no like regulations around like what you can actually say on satellite radio.
Oh fuck, I didn't know that.
So Opie and Anthony, they were just radio jockeys or whatever, but they would constantly have all these comedians come in. Like, you would have your Rogans, Patrice O'Neal was always on there. Bill Burr, Rogan, like all those guys from that generation would always hang out there, right? And it just became a hang, right? And then Rogan just came on, was like, this was really fucking fun, and then was just like, you know what, I want to try this. And yeah, so that's basically how he got started, is because he was inspired by Opie and Anthony. I think it was like Seth. No, was it there's this Canadian guy, this Canadian comedian, I forget his name now. Seth Green, not Seth Green. No, it's not Seth MacFarlane.
No.
Tom Green.
Tom Green
was doing this way back in the day as well. Like, he would have like a whole server set up in his house. But yeah, so it's just crazy to see how that's evolved to now podcasting as the actual, like, another, it opened up a lot of doors for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's just wild to see Rogan's journey, because, like, even like, man, like, to your point, his influence is actually crazy, man. It's wild.
I think he's like the only. He's like such a perfect example of like what doing something for a long period of time and being genuine. You know, just being your genuine self and unlock for you in terms of like opportunity, in terms of like just I I guess, you know, the compensation aspect of it, because he's fucking huge. You know what I mean? And just the amount of, I won't say power, but influence that he has.
Definitely has power. Like just by way of influence.
Oh yeah,
that's
exactly.
Power,
that's power.
I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I just want to make him sound like a tyrant or something. You know what I mean?
What I really find interesting about Joe's case is the fact that he did it like unintentionally.
Yeah, exactly.
There was no strategy behind it. There was no like it's kind of contrary. It's an exception to what we were talking about before. Like if you take Joe's approach and doing it that way, he kind of just like felt his way through. He just did what felt right. He knew that he was doing podcasting and it was fun, but I don't necessarily think that he had any intention of what this was not part of his grand scheme of like a plan from the very beginning. He just started doing it because it was fun.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that lesson, whether you're going to have a strategy or not have a strategy, I think it's as long as it's something that you enjoy, that you have fun in, I think that's base level, like something that's going to take you far anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's fundamental to doing things for the long term, I would think. You know, you got to have some kind of interest or you got to get some kind of fun out of the thing that you're doing, especially if you want to do it well, if you want to get good at it too, right? So I mean, that's a principle for YMP that I would like to think, you know, because
100%.
It's 100% a principle. Like, because I mean, I don't know. Like, someone asked a question to Joe too recently. I feel like it was just a perfect wave of just in terms of timing
and technology,
of course, and also I mean, you can probably put this under the same bucket too, but just luck as well. Like I feel
that 100, but you got to be good to be lucky.
You got to be good to be lucky.
Got to be good to be lucky.
So in his case, someone asked him the question: if you were to this day still getting like 500 or 200 views per episode, would you keep doing it? And he said he didn't know. And I think that he found a formula that worked, and the perfect storm occurred when it should have, for him to, go on to the next level in terms of viewership, in terms of opportunity, and in terms of just platform in general. Like podcasts over the past couple of decades have really grown into this format that a lot of people are, just drawn to for whatever reason, like long format discussion, uninterrupted.
Yeah, I think that's fundamentally changed the game. I think people can have more nuanced conversations and discussions. And
so the question of, I think about that question. I mean, I think about it now, but like even just like randomly throughout the past couple of weeks when I last heard, I think he had an interview with these two people at his studio, which is something that I've never seen before. But anyway, I think about it because for us, like the bottom line is we have like a somewhat of a guiding light as to why we're doing this, and I think that that's a guiding light that's, for us, is good enough for us to like want to like get better every single week, to come in and do what we're doing right now, having an episode, shooting the shit, having a talk about whatever the fuck happened this past week, or whatever the fuck we're interested in general, right?
Yeah.
But it will come a point naturally where eventually where we have to decide like, fuck, like what's going to be like the motive or the goal. Like, is it to keep going even though we're only getting like 100 viewers type of thing? I still think it is, as long as you have that guiding light.
To me, like at a base level, I like this even if there are no viewers, just for me to catch up and hang out with my brother.
Exactly.
And also a way for us to document like our journey through life, man. Like I think what's really cool about this, that think about it this way. Let's say we were to jump forward a generation, right? And mom and dad grew up with us in the generation that we grew up in, right? And they had the wherewithal to start recording stuff with their parents. I think it would be dope for them to have left a lot of content for us after the fact.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I agree.
So for me, that's why I really was gung-ho about recording and interviewing like our family members.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because definitely, I wish obviously can't do anything about it now, but I wish that I had more like videos and stuff of us even when we were younger, man. You know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a cool fucking thing too, because like there's I often also think there's a lot of people out there, or very few people, that can say at the end of their lives that they have some kind of body of work. And I think it'd be so cool to have that for anyone, you know, whether you're into fucking art or video game. That's why everything matters, you know, like we talked a couple of weeks ago about that that just completely what's the word, like reprehensible
I don't know what you're trying
person.
to get at. What are you trying
You know, that completely
it's reprehensible, unforgivable.
that unbelievable person from Sky News that was commenting on that kid about the Tetris thing.
Oh, the hater or whatever.
The hater, yeah. Is that the word, reprehensible? She's
no, reprehensible is probably another word I would use on that. Man, like if it's not in your vocab, dog, like you just don't even try, bro. But like, I appreciate the reach. Actually, don't keep trying that. Huh?
It's like you're just completely.
It's not. It's like what are you trying to? It's
reprehensible. Anyway, this chick from Sky
I don't
News.
even have the vocab. Yeah, more than anything, it just.
I think reprehensible is the word. Just
reprehensible means it's like it's unforgivable.
Yeah,
bro. Like,
yeah. She was unforgivable. Anyway,
she was just a hater. That's really what it is. That's just hate, bro.
Anyway, the point I was trying to make with that is that anything fucking matters. I think as long as you find fucking meaning to it, you know what I mean? Like for that kid as Tetris, for someone it could be fucking the paintings that they make, like the thousands of paintings that they make that never see an art show or like a fucking, you know, a museum or whatever the fuck. Where do people hold art? I don't even know, a museum. But as long as you find meaning into it, at the end of your life, you can look back and be like, yo, I fucking ran that. You know?
Exactly.
Like that's good enough. And for us, like, I think it would be, like, we talked about this before. It'd be so dope to like at the end of your life be like, yo, this is, you have, okay, now kids and grandkids, you have my entire life conversations that I've had with interesting people on the topics that I love and the topics that I was curious about. This is yours now. This is like my gift to you. And for, you know, like hopefully I could inspire you to do something similar.
Exactly.
Know? And that's your body of work. You know what I mean? And also the influence that this could potentially have in just like helping someone's life get 1%
even
better,
at the very least, if this is something
you know?
that we could leave for our descendants, I'm happy with that at a base, man.
I think that's so fucking
honestly.
dope. That's so fucking dope.
Like,
Viewership and stuff aside, like all the sponsorship.
To me, that's a bonus, man.
Yeah.
Like, to me, I like this acts as a journal for us. This acts as a way for us to talk shit. This acts as a way for a platform for us to just really, you know, stay in contact with each other and whatnot. Because obviously life can get in the way sometimes, but you know, we're making time every week to basically hang out, and I think that's fucking dope.
Just watering the plant.
Watering the plant, man.
You like a big thing for a lot of people is that they don't have a fucking plant. You got to find yourself a plant. You got to water that bitch.
Yeah,
you know?
Well, okay. Look, some
because it's so much better to have a plant than not. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. It's just like we talked about before. It's like when I'm going to the grocery store, you're a lot more efficient if I'm gonna have a grocery list before I go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And 100%, like, you know, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? But, and so there are, I think it's such a blessing for people that have realized what they want to do as like when it's early. But I still think it's a blessing if you find it at all. Because sometimes there are some where they just take the safe path of doing what is expected of them and doing what everybody else is doing. And then there comes a time in their life where they realize, fuck, I should have just done X, Y, Z. You know what I mean? And arguably, the safe path is actually not really that safe to begin with. Like the average person has $2K in the bank. You know what I mean? Like is probably not living to their fullest potential in general. You know what I mean? Maybe this is just like a pessimistic way of looking at it, but arguably the safe path is not that safe. So it's just like having the courage to being like, you know what, I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna be fucking shit at it, but who knows what other doors that this is gonna open up. Like, I'm gonna try it. We're gonna be we're shit at this right. Well, maybe we're not that shit, but I think relatively speaking, like we're okay, right? We're like 4-stripe white belts. You know what I'm saying? We got some game, right?
3-stripe white belt.
Right?
You know
But what I'm saying is, like, we had the courage to put ourselves out there to actually try this damn thing, and who knows what fucking doors are gonna open up as a result of this. But had we not done that, had we not taken that step to actually start, that those doors are going to stay perpetually closed.
Yeah.
Right.
100%. So, you gotta go on your journey. Go get yourself a fucking plan. But going back, there's a little we digressed a lot there. Because I did want to ask you some things about your own BJJ journey, because I think, you know, it is, we're 21 days into the new year, right? It's still time, people, to get your to get some to learn some new things and to get yourself a fucking plant. In this case, a potential plant could be starting your first jiu-jitsu class ever, right? And so talk about your journey a little bit, how you got into it, and then from there we could talk about like what advice you would give you know, some newbie coming in that's interested.
How did I get into it? So I always loved combat sports. I actually first trained judo when I was like 8, 9 for like a year or something like that.
Did you really?
Yeah. Back in Mississauga Valley's community center, baby.
Damn.
Yeah. But so did that for a bit. Really liked it. I actually don't know why I stopped. I can't place a particular reason. But so then in high school, this is when like Pacquiao was first making his run. I started like hitting the pads a little bit, getting, you know, just kind of learning. Not really like anything too formal, whatever. I didn't sign up for any gyms or anything like that, but I would just go to like, you know, we had like a boxing
clubs.
Bag, for example, right? Well, actually, shout out Francis. I remember back in the day, he had some fight clubs in some basements.
No way.
Yeah,
I believe it.
So franchise, baby. Yeah. So anyway, so that happened, and then it wasn't until like I got into university that I started boxing. And then I always wanted to get, like, I loved UFC. This was when GSP was making his run, and like, you know, I really got into UFC when Chuck Liddell, when it was like Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, GSP, Matt Serra, BJ Penn, when they were like all in their primes, you know what I mean? Crazy. And some of my favorite fighters, like your GSPs, your BJ Penns or whatever, like they all were grapplers.
Such a crazy era.
So I remember when I was training boxing in Toronto, Buller Boxing Club, and then I moved back home to Saga. And that's where I started training boxing at Mafa Evo with Raf Delgado. Shout out Raf. And I always wanted to do like, so I also did a little bit of Muay Thai, and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to try it. Like, and then I'm going to try Jiu-Jitsu as well, because I wanted to do like all of them. Right. And then once I started Jiu-Jitsu, man, I remember vividly that week I hit my PR in bench press. Like I was hitting like 3 plates plus like a 25 or some shit like that.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
How much
so
did you
I
weigh
was
at the
lifting
time?
a lot back then. I was like 200. I was like 200 pounds back then.
Oh my God.
No, maybe 210.
You're morbidly obese, bro.
I was fucking, bro. I was like, I took lifting pretty, but you know, I fucked myself over from doing that. Honestly,
Yeah,
like my body got mangled because of that.
Shit.
But anyway, so I remember that because my first week of jiu-jitsu, it was Vic that taught class because Dave was in, I think he was like in like Iceland or some shit at the time. And I remember just getting tapped out by like, I think it was, my memory says it's Josh Rampersad, who was this little scrawny little kid at the time. He was like maybe like 90 pounds soaking wet at the time.
Fucking A.
And talk about the moment you realize that your bench press means shit in jiu-jitsu. And that's where I really fell in love with it, because I had some bad experiences in boxing. I don't know if you remember that Filipino boxing coach that was at Mafa back in those days.
Armando,
yeah.
fuck that guy.
Armando. Yeah. Anyway, so he would put me in dangerous situations because you know what I mean. Where he would like, I was just really really new at boxing, and he would be putting me in the rings against like professional fighters, bro. And the thing is with like in striking, I'm not saying everybody's like this, but there's a little bit more machismo, a little bit more ego that goes into it. You know what I mean? Compared to jiu-jitsu. There's more meatheads I find in striking than there are in jiu-jitsu, at least back when I was starting in those days. Anyway, so I started jiu-jitsu, just fell completely in love with it. And yeah, so that was back in like 2015, 2016. And pretty much been training 3-4 times at least a week since then, pretty much every day for good stretches, you know, except for when I actually got injured with my back. And yeah, now we're here, man. Like it's been a wild ride, one of the most rewarding and hardest things that I've ever had to do in my life, but I wouldn't trade anything for it, man. It's fun to like it. It's corny as it sounds, man, but it changed the direction of my life, because I was going through some shit back in those days that like I was not in a good place or whatever, and I think I sought refuge at the gym, classical story, right? But
yeah, what about that refuge, quote unquote refuge? Like, did you find your interest, like, or not really interest, but like what about it? What made it kind of that refuge for you?
I think
that's a cool word. That's a cool way to put it.
Yeah,
it's really one of those things you could just get away from
life, man. Like, you know, you enter the gym with a bunch of problems that you're mulling over or whatever, and it might be fucking up your mood, or things might be going on in your life, but you leave that shit at the door. Because if you don't, and you're constantly thinking about, and this is what I was talking about in the last episode, one of the things that it gives me is presence,
right?
Like being present, you know what I mean? And if you're like, more times than not, if I'm dealing with something outside of the mats, and then I go and have a good training session, I realize after, like, you know what, I feel good. It's like having a good hard workout. Like you're gonna have some good juices flowing afterwards, you know what I mean? Serotonin, whatever, you know what I mean? Like those good hormones flowing, and you just feel better about it. And then most of the times you just realize not that big of a deal, actually, because you look at it from a different lens,
right?
You know what I mean? Like, I just survived a simulated death match. Whatever I was dealing with actually is not that big of a deal.
And when you say simulated death match, because that's exactly what it is every single time.
Essentially what it is, yeah. Because
the whole point of the sparring session, or the whole point of the match in jiu-jitsu, so usually the weight classes, the traditional weight classes are held if you sign up to a BJJ dojo or gym, get a membership, is you'll have a 1.5 hour block. Half of that is dedicated towards your instructor teaching you techniques that you would practice on your partner, and then the second half of that would be dedicated to sparring. And sparring is 5-minute rounds. Simulated deathmatch is a good way to put it, because the whole goal of those 5-minute rounds is to try to get to a point where you could submit your partner, your sparring partner, and get a tap and then reset. So, I mean, that's the goal, obviously. That's one of the goals. Another goal, too, from a training perspective, is to try to work on the technique that you might have learned that day, or something else that you've learned in previous lesson. But the very essence of BJJ, for people that might not know, is to try to submit your opponent.
And that can be through a strangulation, which is like a chokehold, or through a limb break, like an arm bar or knee bar or whatever. So going back to your earlier question, is like, okay, like, why did I really like fall in love with? Why did I get into it? Like, being present, like just having a refuge where I could be present and like kind of leave everything at the door and just go through that motion. Like it covers a lot of bases for me, right? Like, it gives me, from a health and fitness standpoint, it's a great workout, 100%.
Fantastic.
From a mind standpoint, it's a great way to release any tension, any aggression that you might have. It's a great, like, even for me and you, man, one of the things that I'm so thankful for jiu-jitsu is because prior to jiu-jitsu, you and I did not have that great of a relationship. And I actually attribute a lot of our positive a lot of our positive headway through jiu-jitsu.
Right.
It's not to say that we were at a terrible place prior to it, but we were still clashing heads a lot back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I remember once you started training, we had actually a healthy outlet to kind of release some of that aggression that we had towards each other, and then realize, fuck, like this is dope. Like, you know what I mean? And I think that's where we started really bonding. You know what I mean? So, I was really thankful for that. I really credit a lot of that to jiu-jitsu and just kind of opening that door for us. But the other aspect of it as well, from a gaming standpoint, from a mental standpoint, is it's a game. It's mental. It's a physical chess, and unlike chess, like what you're trying to do is to essentially submit your opponent through a sequence of techniques to put them in a position that either they're going to get their limb broken or they're going to get choked out.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a simulated death match. And what's interesting about jiu-jitsu, contrary to a lot of other martial arts, is there are far deeper consequences if you don't have partners that you don't trust. So if I tap, there's an inherent trust there that I know that you're going to let go. You know what I mean? But if you don't let go, I will literally die if you don't let go of that rear naked choke. You know what I mean? So that's, I think, the other rewarding thing about jiu-jitsu is because of that, you build up there's an inherent trust that you have with your training partners. You know what I mean? It's just like, I trust you that if I do tap that you're going to let go. And because of that, I think, friendships are really easy to make on the mats. You know what I mean?
That's a good way. That's a good way to put it.
So that was a big piece of it. And I mean, for all those reasons, and just the camaraderie and just the practice of an art and expressing yourself through that art are really appealing to me. And it's one of the most difficult things that I have ever done, but it's also been one of the most rewarding. Yeah.
That point about being present and how jiu-jitsu kind of is, I mean, there's a lot of things that kind of fall under that vein. Gaming or any kind of like outlet, like gaming or another martial art even, or even another sport, an activity, weightlifting, right? But I think for me, jiu-jitsu is a little bit different because you have like another person that's trying to fucking kill you,
exactly.
So it's not like basketball where sometimes you can kind of get, you can get complacent. You can just like find yourself running back and forth, not really involved in the play. There's definitely times where like I'm either on the bench or I'm on the court and I'm kind of just like thinking about what the fuck happened at work that day or something, or even gaming, like and I think that with jiu-jitsu, the way it's different is because, especially if you're going round after round and you're constantly drilling, you really have no other choice but to be present.
You don't. And because the thing, I think the key word here is consequence. Yeah. There are consequences for you not being present.
Yes, exactly.
If you're not being present in a basketball match or in a basketball game, you could get away with it, right? Yeah. You could kind of lean. It's also fundamentally, there's a big difference here because that's a team sport versus an individual sport. But even for gaming, for that, like you lose, no big deal. You just start a new game.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna respawn and keep going. Right.
Right.
The consequences, if anything, on that side is more mental more than anything. It's like, shit, like I lost. Blah, blah, blah. Whereas the consequences in jiu-jitsu are like physical. Like there is real consequences there that if you're not present, either you get choked out, or if the consequences of not knowing a certain technique and getting out of it could mean that you're actually your reaction to it can then cause you to break your own arm accidentally, or you break your own leg. You know what I mean? So I think there's more at stake. There's more consequences to it, and it's more humbling. Fun when there's more at stake. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's humbling for sure. How would you, for someone that's looking to start BJJ in 2024, take their first class, they might be interested in looking at Revo? Like,
yeah. So
what advice would you have for that
suggest for someone that's like interested in starting to train any martial art? This doesn't even go for jiu-jitsu, but any martial art, is find which ones are closest to you. Number one, right? usually there's going to be like, nowadays there's so many different options, bro. Back in the day, like when Tomo was starting and shit, like there were like, if you were a blue belt, you were a god here. If you were a purple belt, oh my god, like bro, people are traveling to go and train with you. You know what I mean? So it was a wild world back then. But now you basically like, it's really cool to see how much the community is growing. But I would say find out which gyms are closest to you. Pick like 3, 4 or whatever, or pick 2, and then usually each gym is going to have a free trial, right? And use that free trial to find out whether or not is it a good fit, right? Depending on what your goals are and depending on what they do. Maybe one of the gyms is more of a competition heavy type of gym, but you're not really interested in doing competition, right? Maybe the vibe is better at one gym than it is at another gym, you know, because you could have gyms where you literally just show up and guys are there to fight. Not my cup of tea, right? Whereas, like, to me, a good sign of a gym, a good room, is you have a good mix of different people, right? Where you might have some really high level competitors, but you'll also have kind of like the more hobbyist type of jiu-jitsu people, and a broad range also of occupations. I think that's also always a good sign as well. Like, you could have people that are like doctors, lawyers, that are there, but also law enforcement, blue collar, white collar, you know what I mean? I think that's also a good sign. But generally, when you find one that you have a bunch of nerds in there, that is a really good sign, because that you know that you'll have some solid training partners that are very, very technical. You know what I mean? So that's number one, is finding what's near you, using the free trials to find out what is the best fit. Right?
In terms of the people that you're surrounded by,
the instructor, and and your goals, right?
See if those align. Okay,
exactly. And then once you do find it, right? So you have to be ready to take L's
right off the bat. First day, right off the bat, and it's all good. Part of it.
It's part of the learning process.
You should seek to take more L's.
Seek to take more L's, because the thing
literally,
is,
like, even while you're sparring too.
Yes, 100%. So what I always encourage people to do is, like, okay, look, you're gonna find, like, you might get put in a certain submission all the time, and we're going to go over how to teach you how to avoid doing that. But even yourself, you're going to there's going to be that muscle memory of, like, oh crap, I remember how this felt. If I let them progress any further, I know where this ends up. You're going to start building that familiarity of like almost like the spidey sense of, like, oh, something's coming now. You know what I mean? But early on, you're going to be taking L's, man. Like, and you just have to accept it. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. Another thing is just focus on not being a spaz. Nobody likes a spaz, right? So don't use your strength and athleticism, at least early on, to try to get out of stuff. Because the thing is, when you try to use speed, especially when you're not in a position that you're familiar with, that is a perfect recipe for you to injure somebody or injure yourself. Right. So try not to be a spaz. And what that means is just, do things deliberately, do things slowly. There's a saying in jiu-jitsu: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Right.
I like that.
So don't be a spaz. Be a good training partner. Right. So when you're drilling with someone, the purpose of the drill is for the person that's drilling to get better at that particular skill. Now, we can have an argument about whether or not drilling is good or drilling is bad or whatever, because that's kind of like a common thing here. I definitely am a fan of, when you're first learning a technique, to drill that just from a mechanics standpoint, to make sure that you understand the mechanics of it, and then doing drilling with resistance, right? But regardless of where you stand on that, when you are drilling, be a good drilling partner. Don't be a dick. Nobody gives a shit if you win a drill, man. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, you're literally just practicing, right? So, like, don't go into it giving 100%. Always start at like a 20-25%. Let your partner be successful. And if they're successful, then you up it by 5%, up it by 5%. If they're not being successful, lower by 5%. Let them be successful. Don't be a dick, right? Let them learn. And then remembering that you're helping coach your partner when you're the partner that's helping them drill. Right? What else? So that's, I would say, early. Oh, and the other thing as well is practicing what you learn in class. Something that I always encourage, like the newer guys that are starting with us, is spend those first two rounds. Like, look, sparring and rolling is so much fun. Don't get me wrong. I love it as well. But if I were to go back and do it again, I would definitely, like, from a efficiency standpoint, like I'm always interested in efficiency and getting more results with less time, right? And because at the end of the day, time is money, man. Like if you could do something faster, better, and whatnot in an easier way, then take that opportunity. Rich man, poor man, every man has 24 hours in a day. Facts. So spend those whatever you're learning that day, spend the first round, 2 rounds, find your like a drilling partner to work with, and then just drill with them. Get to work on what you worked on that day, because believe me, it might sound boring, it might feel boring, honestly, but your learning curve is going to be that much more steeper when you take that approach.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
So I would say finding the right fit. What else did I say? The second point, understanding that you're going to take L's, right? And don't be a good training partner. Don't be a spaz.
Yep.
And working on what you learned that day. I would say when you're first starting out, those are the 4 things, at least that come to mind when you ask me that.
Right. Oh. And that's kind of if you were to start over again. I like how you framed that too. If you were to start over again, those would be the things that you would.
Yeah, definitely
work on too.
Definitely, because I was that spaz.
Yeah.
When starting out, I mean, like, man, shout out Clem. That's my guy. That's one of my. That's another thing about jiu-jitsu is, like, I think I mentioned this on the last pod, is that because of that inherent trust that you have with your training partners and the bonds that you make on the mats, man, some of the most meaningful and great friendships that I made in my adult life is through jiu-jitsu. And Clem's one of those guys. I met him when I was training jits, and he didn't like me at first because I was a spaz, bro. Like I just was, because remember, I was basically like a meathead back then. I was just like lifting a whole bunch, and I would just always use my strength and athleticism to beat my opponents, right? And that doesn't constitute the best training partner.
Yeah.
So, but then, you learn, usually there's going to be like a quote unquote enforcer in the club where, maybe that's not the best way to put it, but there's usually somebody that's going to be able to just kind of show them, hey, slow them down enough to where they realize, like, okay, hey, actually, you know what, like, and I mean, let's not do that.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of that approach. That's kind of like an old school way of doing it. For me, it's always like, it's emphasizing and reminding students as an instructor. So something that I always do, like when we're drilling, is just reminding them, hey, this is not about winning, guys. This is about practicing. Don't be a dick. Make sure that your partner's successful, right? And then even when we start sparring, it's just like, okay, like if you're because the thing is, especially with new people, they just don't know. They don't have that context, right? So it's just like, okay, if you're someone that's way bigger than someone that's way smaller, don't use 100%. Like make it so that you get value out of it. Right? If I'm going against a white belt, I'm not going to pull out my A game on everything and just submit them 5-6 times. Like that's a dick move on my part. You know what I mean?
What are your thoughts on what's your approach now that, okay, we've established, like, here are the 4 things that you should do, or that you should consider when on your journey of, like, okay, here we're about to go and start jiu-jitsu, right? We established that. What's your approach? Because when people come in day one, they'll learn about the belt system. They'll learn about the time it takes. What is your approach to learning and improving techniques and just learning jiu-jitsu in general? And how can what's your advice around, like, how people can kind of adopt a good approach to that? So that they can, get the most out of their sessions and their spars, their rolls.
I think leave leave your trust and faith in your instructor. I mean, and not to imply that later on that you're not going to have trust and faith in your instructor. What I'm getting at is that you have to kind of inherently trust them that they're going to guide you in the right path. And obviously that's something that you have to kind of monitor as you go, right? Because not all instructors are going to necessarily be that way. Generally, I would say that they are, but not always the case. Just because you train jiu-jitsu doesn't mean that you're not going to be a dick. There are dicks in jiu-jitsu.
There's a lot of people that just lack social skills.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so in terms of addressing your question, like how would someone go about approaching their game, whatever. So first, it goes back to the answer that I gave previously, is like focusing and working on the thing that you're learning, and just like trying to familiarize yourself with that as much as possible. I definitely, if I were to go back now, I definitely would have spent a lot more time wrestling and trying to stay on top and passing, because in a fight, like, you're not going to pull guard, or at least like I wouldn't pull guard, right? Because I don't want to end up on bottom. I want to stay on top, right? So that's something that definitely I would have spent a little bit more time on. So if you're just starting, it depends on where you're at with your life as well. If you're just starting out, like, and maybe you're a little bit older or whatever, you have to find a training partner that you trust, that you can actually practice on those things, because, you could end up hurting your, I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's a contact sport. It's a combat, like, better yet, it's a combat sport. You're going to get dinged up one way or another. You know what I mean? It's just a matter of time. You know what I mean? But so that's number one is I would say for me, my personal journey is like, I would probably spend more time learning on, like, passing and spending more time on top. That's definitely something that I'm spending more time on now. But wrestling, I would have loved to have done a little bit more wrestling when I was younger. I had an opportunity to wrestle in the high school wrestling team. I just didn't, because I was just so opposed to wearing that singlet, bro. Literally,
Yeah.
it was just a fashion thing. I was like, fuck that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But another thing as well is, don't try to pressure yourself to mimic your instructor's game, because everybody has a different physiology. And I think I was kind of guilty of it, whereas it's not bad to like kind of look up to somebody's game or whatever, but don't like, that's their expression of the art, right? So it's what we talked about last week, where I'd rather go to a gym where everyone displays fundamentals, like strong fundamentals, but everyone has a different focus. Everyone has a different specialization. You could have a half guard guy, you could have a De La Riva guy, you could have a guy that's really good at guillotines. You know what I mean? Whereas you go to another school and it's like everyone is just a clone of each other. That's so uninteresting, you know what I mean? And and it's kind of just like that, to me, that reeks of an instructor that's just forcing their game down on their student.
Right.
And so that's just my personal opinion on it. I'm sure that people have conflicting views on it, but that's just my take. And so what was I getting at? Like, I would say another thing as well is, so focusing on what you're learning. That was number one. Number two, I would say, really getting obsessed with one thing at a time. Finding something. So actually, this goes back to like the style thing that I was talking about. Is don't try to pressure yourself to mimic your instructor's style. Like, get the fundamentals and then find something that you really enjoy, something that you really want to take a deep dive in, and do that deep dive. And something for me that I think this is something that you see in any other sport is like, I really like Allen Iverson's crossover, so I'm going to practice Allen Iverson's crossovers. You know what I mean?
Right. I
really like Marcelo Garcia's game with the butterfly and the guillotine. So I practice literally, like, I try to mimic Marcelo Garcia's game, because I was just like, I really liked Marcelo Garcia's game, right? Not necessarily Dave or Toma's game or anything like that, but that's the part of the reason why I got obsessed with it. And then from there, just being a little bit like being deliberate and intentful in your training. So yes, going to training and being consistent and just showing up you will still improve 100%, but going in there with a plan of like, you know what, I for the next 2-3 weeks, I want to just focus. I just want to work on what I've been researching or reviewing or doing for homework, which is the front
Or
headlock.
learning from the class.
Yeah, no, so that's baseline. I would say that's
Yeah.
baseline. Like you definitely still want to work on that, but you also, I think, especially, I know for me, what I've experienced before is like when there's a big influx of new students, for example, the instructor will spend more time getting them caught up, which is still a good thing, 100%, because the faster that they get better, the faster that they can help us get better as well. But that's where you have to take a little bit more, like, you know, when you get in a little bit more senior belts, you're going to start seeing classes repeat by the instructor. That's just natural, right?
Yeah.
Especially when there's a new crop of new people. And that, obviously, you still have your fundamentals classes as well, or whatever. But even when fundamental, like, you know, just in general, that's something that you might find depending on what school you're in. And when that does happen, that's where you kind of like, there's so much. We're so blessed in this generation in that this whole kind of culture that existed in the past where people were kind of like holding techniques in secret and like, this is secret knowledge that was passed down from me and my master, and now it's like, no, you cannot go to another gym and you're a Koreanch if you go to another gym like that's kind of like that time's
Old
past
school.
now, right?
Yep.
Like cross training with other gyms back in the day was so frowned upon.
Cringe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that because when you do get to that point, I would say, like, even before that, like, even as a white belt, man, like, if you there's so much information online now, just BJJ Fanatics, for example, all these instructionals that you could really do a deep dive on a specific position that you really enjoy. Like, if you watch Gordon Ryan and you like the way that he does leg locks, go watch his shit. Go learn and take notes and find a training partner that is also interested in that same shit and work, like literally go on a deep dive with them on that topic.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's huge. And then that's where you can use your instructor as a resource and like bounce ideas off of them. Like, to me, if I were to go back, I would have just see, again, it all depends on what you're trying to get out of the game, right? Like for me, I'm really interested in getting the most out of my time that I do spend on it, and so part of that is like what I start viewing my what I'm learning at school, like by my instructor, as just one piece of a broader collection of different resources that I'm using to develop my own game. So if I were to go back, I probably would have started researching on my own earlier.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I didn't really do that up until like blue belt, like late blue. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you've gone through, at that point, late blue, like you've gone through so many classes and you've seen the whole buffet. That's I think you were the one that coined that first. Or maybe it was Dave, our instructor. But it really is, you're going to see your first year, especially. There's like every class, every week, it's pretty much buffet style type learning. Like there's going to be so many different positions and techniques that your instructors are going to teach you. And then it's up to you to kind of be like, yo, like which one, to your point, which one vibes with me the most? Which one do I jive with? What do I see? Like what's my own style, right? And so you select from that buffet of techniques and positions and all that, and then you really just hone in on a focus. You hone in on a particular style, and then from there, you know, after that first year of just like taking L's and practicing that a little bit, you can then start to really hone in on that and dig deeper into the nuance, either by watching, doing your own research on those positions and that style, finding other people that simulate or emulate that style. Question that I had for you, for someone that's on that, for someone that's starting, who would be like, because the internet's just so accessible nowadays and people could just search shit up so easily. And so who would be like, 2-3 people that you would recommend, yo, go check out his shit. He's got good content. You're in good hands if you watch his stuff or her stuff.
I would say it really depends on what your style, what kind of style that you like.
Yeah.
Right. For me personally, so it's just like you're asking me, yo, if you watch basketball, if you want to get into basketball, who are your like who
Yeah,
would you watch?
that's
right?
a good way to put it.
Now, if I was like a guard, I probably wouldn't be watching. I wouldn't be watching what a center would.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If I was a center, I wouldn't be watching fucking Stephen Curry's instructionals. Maybe,
Yeah,
but like
maybe.
what I'm saying is that like it depends on what floats your boat. Like what do you find cool about that thing? Like, do you find post moves cool? Do you find shooting cool? Right? It's the same thing in jiu-jitsu. It's like,
Well, let's say that like 3 that would pretty much represent a comprehensive baseline.
Comprehensive.
Yeah.
I would, well, for me, I'm partial. I like Marcelo Garcia is up there, and the reason why Marcelo Garcia is because not only was he effective at his weight class. So first off, for those that don't know, what's really different, what makes jiu-jitsu different from a lot of other martial arts, is that it's a martial art that allows for no weight classes. So there are weight classes, 100%, where people fight at the same weight, but unlike boxing or Muay Thai or anything like those striking sports, it's I mean, Muay Thai has had it in the past, but it's not as prevalent as it is in jiu-jitsu, where you can have a guy that's 150 pounds fight a guy that's 250.
Yeah.
And Marcel and jiu-jitsu is so technical that you can have a smaller guy effectively beat a much larger opponent.
Right. You still don't get it twisted. You still have that advantage as a 250-pound person
100%
because of that weight.
But because of the technique,
Yes.
and because of the knowledge and the technology,
There's a possibility.
there is a way that like it's not unheard of for someone much smaller beating much larger people
In jiu-jitsu, yeah.
in jiu-jitsu.
100%.
And it's not that much larger person doesn't have any technique. That person is still a high level technician as well. But because of like, you know, like Marcelo just like that just was sharpening that blade of the butterfly, of the single leg X, of the just the X guard in general, and the front headlocks. Like he was just sharpening these certain key techniques that were really part of his game, that he was able to submit much larger opponents consistently.
Right.
You know what I mean? It wasn't just like a one-off. You know what I mean? So I would say for sure, like for those, especially for those that are still that have just started training, and maybe, you know, you're just starting your jiu-jitsu journey, I would definitely say look up Marcelo Garcia stuff just to get inspired, man. Like at the very least, just to get inspired. I would also say obviously look into Gordon Ryan stuff. Gordon Ryan is like arguably the best no-gi grappler in the world, like in history right now. I would watch John Danaher's stuff as well. What's really cool about them is that they could have, like, I mean, they chose to put the knowledge out there. And I think you're seeing everybody's technique has gotten so much better because of these instructionals. I would also say like Rafa Mendez, from Art of Jiu-Jitsu, and Guy Mendez, especially from a gi aspect.
Yes.
They have solid stuff as well. Rafa is considered to be like one of the greatest of all time in his weight class. And yeah, I would say you're pretty much covered between those guys. You're pretty much covered. Obviously, there's all like some of my personal favorites are guys like Craig Jones, Gary Tonin, like guys that like constantly go for the submissions. Like that's kind of like more my style. Like I'm not a big fan of like stalling or anything like that, and just like using the point system to win matches. I'd rather go for the submission. But yeah, I would say that you're covered with those guys for sure.
So what for those that are coming in, again, we're only 21 days into the new year. If you're thinking about jiu-jitsu, what are some common myths that hopefully you can debunk that might be perceived in the beginning that people might not know are full of shit?
I think number one, I'm going to start off with that there's this common thing that jiu-jitsu is for everyone. And I would say, I would just make a clarification on that, because I don't think that jiu-jitsu is for everyone at all. I think that's a myth. I think that jiu-jitsu is for everyone with the right attitude. I think that's where I would make that clarification, because if you have no interest in, like, if that's not your thing at all, like if you're someone that has no desire to get into any kind of physical altercation or anything like that, like I get it, like whatever, it's not for you, right? But you know, if you look, you have to have, there's a certain personality that will thrive in jiu-jitsu. And the thing is, you may not have that personality to begin with. That's something that you can develop. And what I mean by that is a personality of being able to take L's, being able to leave your ego at the door. There are a lot of guys, some of them are my friends, that start jiu-jitsu, and like everything on paper, they could really succeed at jiu-jitsu. But because they can't get past that mental barrier of, shit, I suck at this. I don't like my ego can't handle the fact that I suck at this. Therefore, because I don't want to have that feeling of sucking at something, I'm just not gonna get into it. So I think jiu-jitsu's for everyone with the right mindset, right? Like I don't think it's for everyone per se.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two is jiu-jitsu. There's a lot of times people will say like, oh, like strength and speed and stamina. Well, more so strength and speed. They don't matter in jiu-jitsu. Like you shouldn't really rely on strength and speed in jiu-jitsu. Like, yeah, you do. Like for you to say that strength and speed don't matter, like no, that's completely wrong. 100,000% speed and strength matter, right? So
especially in the context.
Especially in the context, it's a combat sport, man.
Yeah.
So if you like, don't get me wrong, there obviously like you don't want to be a dick when it comes to your training partner and just wholly rely on speed and strength. But there are guys that would like maybe they're not as trained, but there will be times where you're going to be training somebody that's not experienced with a technique, and just be super strong and super fast, and they might still they might still get the advantage over you because speed and strength fundamentally matter. Now, if you add speed, strength, and technique, that's a different story. 100,000%. That's just a multiplier of all multipliers. But for me to sit here and be like, yo, speed and strength don't really matter in jiu-jitsu, that's a bull-faced lie.
Yeah,
that's a lie that a lot of people will try to push, and the reality is like, it's just not true. Like for anybody that's actually being honest with themselves, speed and strength 100,000% matter. And I would say the last piece is, people get caught in this a lot, I would say, is that just because you are a black belt at jiu-jitsu does not make you a black belt at life. A lot, like, a lot of, I've seen a lot of, and there's assholes everywhere, right? But I've seen a lot of hypocrites just in the fact that like they'll kind of I've seen more black belts than I cared to admit. Not as many, honestly. But what I'm getting at is that like just because people kind of put, especially early on, they'll kind of put their instructor on a pedestal sometimes, I find. You know what I mean? And just take their word as like gospel sometimes, And sometimes instructors, even though they push this thing of like, oh, jiu-jitsu doesn't have any ego or anything, like leave your ego at the door, they'll still have like an ego.
They're probably the ones
their
arguably
place of power. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're arguably the ones that have the biggest egos in the fucking room.
Sometimes, man, like I've had it before where like a black belt will kind of like hold on to chokes longer afterwards, just because like I feel like, because I think they had like a certain like dislike to me, for example. You know what I mean? And even though I tap, like they'll hang on to things. It's like, bro, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Or like just and then just be. I think maybe this is just people in general, but like they'll behave in such a way that they know they're kind of a know-it-all just because they're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and people, those that kind of see them in that pedestal kind of light, will kind of take their word for it. And really, it's like, you don't really have any experience in that space. Like, why are you talking, bro? Just because
it's lane,
it's like that. It's but no disrespect to the Brazilians, but you know, there's that whole Brazilian priesthood effect sometimes that goes on, you know what I mean? Like the whole bowing and like bowing to pictures and stuff like that. Like, you know, like some schools focus more so. It's almost in
On
some
the
ways, some places are
formalities.
like cults, man,
Yeah.
honestly, bro. Like, but that's like what I'm getting at is like that when you find yourself in that kind of environment, that's where you might have to ask yourself, like, yo, like, is this the right place for me? You know what I mean? Because not like, I'm not saying that this is the majority. I would say there's the minority, but there are some schools there where the instructors are toxic, man, just toxic.
Yeah.
And
100%.
sometimes when you're deep in that environment, you might not even realize just how bad it is until you visit another school that doesn't have that toxicity behind. Yeah. And yeah, so this is where it goes back to the point that I made earlier. I'm like, you know, I'm just lucky that I found the gym that I found. It was the first jiu-jitsu gym that I trained at. It just happened to be the jiu-jitsu gym that I stayed with, and I made like the room full of people. Like, man, there's a reason why I would travel from Hamilton, Mississauga to train with those guys, because not because of the name on the wall or anything like that. It's because of those are my friends. Those are my guys. You know what I mean? So that's why I made the point of like, when you're first starting out, like, don't just settle on one gym. I would say try out a bunch of different gyms that are close to you, and then see which one vibes with you the most. Go with that one. And yeah, so I would say though, those are the top 3 things that are kind of like myths in jiu-jitsu that let's dispel some of those.
And with that, I think we can actually close this time because we are 4 minutes away from the gym opening up today.
Is it noon already?
It's already noon.
What? Holy,
we gotta
actually?
get that. We gotta get the fuck out of here, folks. But thank you for tuning
way.
in. We'll be back to you next week. Hope everyone has a great week, and perhaps we'll get these rolls in and get a little bit of jiu-jitsu today.
Indubitably.
Peace.